CiCi, first off, thank you for joining. As I said, before we got on camera, I feel like this has been a long time coming, and it's an honor to have you on the show. But I want to start and kind of take a step back to talk about your tennis career. Where this kind of all started. What was it like for you being 15 years old and playing in it was a 2014 U.S. Open? Because when I think about when I was 15, I was like, I could barely leave my hometown, let alone play, on a pro level tour. So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Definitely a long time coming. So excited to be here. But yeah, no, it was crazy. It was one of the first pro tournaments that I ever played. I got a wild card into the event because I won our like junior national tournament, and every winner of that gets a wild card into the U.S. Open. So it was, random, I guess, kind of that I was playing at that time, just with a wild card. But yeah, it was crazy, being that young and playing on a, massive stage like that, especially with having pretty much no experience prior in terms of pro tournaments. So it was wild, and it was, crazy with kind of my first experience with press and media and everything. And yeah, it was a lot for a 15-year-old for sure, but it was awesome.
What would you say is like your most memorable experience from your professional tennis career?
Gosh, that's a tough one. That one's up there for sure. I think just because it was one of my first. And then I think, honestly, playing all the Grand Slams were such great experiences. US Open was definitely my favorite tournament. So definitely, was grateful every time I got to play there and cherish the memories of that tournament for sure. I think the most. But yeah, I mean, I think I won one WTA title, so that's up there for me as well. But yeah, playing at a home slam, I think it doesn't get better than that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And when did this idea of like life after tennis kind of creep in for you? Because like most athletes, I think about my athletic career, like I didn't really start to think about what I wanted to do after playing basketball until I was like on the back end of my career. So was there like a
Yeah.
moment or an experience that you had during your playing career that started to kind of get the wheels turning about like what life after sports looked like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, growing up, school was such a big part of my life and my education was. So that was always a huge focus for me and, something I didn't really want to give up, even though I was playing professional. So I knew that I always wanted to kind of like continue my education, while I was playing and, not kind of make the decision. A lot of, tennis players nowadays have to kind of make a decision of, oh, am I going to go to college or go pro and, be able to, kind of like bet on yourself, I guess, but leave a lot behind. And I was lucky enough that the year I turned pro, the WTA partnered with Indiana University, so got to complete my degree online with them, which was great. Just to have that kind of safety net because, always in the back of my mind, I knew, I'm not the biggest, player out there. I'm not, able to compete, I would say like physically as easily as some of the other girls out there. So, in case anything happened was happy to have that safety net and had a ton of wrist and elbow injuries throughout my career and a few surgeries and, never really was the same after my last surgery. So I feel like it was a period of maybe like 4 or 5 months where I kind of had it in the back of my mind where I was like, hey, this isn't really feeling the same. It's not really working out. I'm still in pain. Let me see kind of what else is out there. So I feel like it was kind of a long time coming in a sense because I had those injuries for a little while, but I kind of gave myself a window. I was like, okay, if I'm not gonna feel 100% by, this date, then I'm gonna try something new. So it was kind of a long time coming, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you, when did venture capital kind of come into the mix? Because most athletes, I would, imagine like we see a lot of athletes get into media or coaching or training in some capacity. Venture, investing in some capacity is not really talked about as much. We're seeing it a little bit more today, but I would say even like 10 years ago, we didn't see a lot of athletes kind of getting into that lane. So why venture capital? Why investing for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up in the Silicon Valley, so I was around VC from a really young age, and it always interested me. Actually, funny enough, I always wanted to get into VC if college was going to be the path for me, tennis wise. Obviously, pro was my path that I chose. But right when I stopped playing, got an internship with actually a family office nearby where I was training. One of the weeks that I was there, I went over to their joint venture partner, which was a sports and health focused venture firm, an earlier stage one, and I absolutely loved it. It kind of opened my eyes to the more, niche areas of venture and not just, from Silicon Valley general tech. Like investing was pretty much all I knew of VC. And so opened my eyes to sports investing and early stage investing and felt like it was the perfect kind of path for me post tennis. So I was really lucky to have that opportunity.
Are there any like specific lessons or things that you learn as an athlete that play a role in investing in venture capital and what you're doing today? Like, are there any specific takeaways you can think about or synergies between both lanes?
I think there's so many for sure. I mean, even when I was getting into venture, I was almost self-conscious a little bit because I knew I didn't have like typical work experience going into that. And I just had, training and athletic experience and competing experience, but so many of those traits really do kind of fall into investing and just the sports like business ecosystem. I mean, for me, I initially had that internship and I knew that I needed to spend, hours and hours and hours, every single day, post work just to make sure I was up to speed on everything that they were talking about. I knew, the acronyms that they were
Yeah.
mentioning. I knew everything going on. And I think that kind of gritty kind of like determination was what kind of got me initially involved in venture. And, even now, like there are so many different pieces to my day where I feel like I can take traits that I learned, whether it's resilience or even, making sure that we're not leaving any stones unturned and diligence in a deal and being gritty and, kind of that same athletic kind of training mindset, bring that over to venture and just investing in general. I think there's a ton of different synergies.
Take me back to the inception of Cartan Capital, your fund. Like, what made you want to start doing your own thing? Because obviously, given your experience, given your notoriety as an athlete, you could have joined another fund. You could have did a variety of different things. So, why did you want to start your own fund? Because it's, as I hear it, it's a very challenging path. You're fundraising, you're investing. There's a lot of moving parts. So, what about that process was appealing for you?
Yeah, I always say I feel like it was the budding athlete in me, the kind of like athlete entrepreneur type mindset that started kind of budding through. But I mean, honestly, I was working at that sports tech focus fund and loving it and love the team there, love my experience there, and felt like I wanted to build something on my own and really got that kind of entrepreneurial itch. I'm sure really it was that kind of athlete mindset. I as an athlete, and you know this better than anyone as well, like you are the CEO of your body, your team, your performance, like you're managing everything. I wanted to build something and manage it and own it and, be responsible for the wins, the losses, and have everything fall on me. And yeah, that's really what kind of pushed me to do it. Saw a broader kind of like opportunity in the space of investing, not only in sports, but alongside sports and, health and wellness and kind of like non-technical areas of health. And kind of the adjacencies to the sports market. So wanted to build on that thesis and build something on my own.
Obviously you just kind of alluded to this, but I want to talk about forming that thesis and like the opportunities that you all are looking for. Like, what does that kind of look like from I guess a deeper level perspective, like the type of companies that you all are most interested in at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the sports side, we invest in kind of like broader, we call it like human performance is what everyone's using now, but that really boils down to, sports, health, wellness, performance type companies. On the sports side for us, we're really broad in terms of what we like to look at in our thesis. So we'll look at most things that touch sports from, sports performance to, data and analytics to fan engagement to, like what's the next generation of sports viewership look like in streaming and broadcasting. We look at everything under NIL. We'll look at betting. We'll look at really anything across sports. And what's funny and what I actually came to learn even when I started in like sports VC is a lot of the sports performance companies out there. I actually tried when I was an athlete. And I'd come across these companies and I'd be like, gosh, this looks so familiar. Where have I tried this? And I trained at our National Tennis Center my whole career, and they were very like forward thinking with trying new tech. And so I felt like every week I was trying a new, piece of tech to see if it would, help the performance or, give me that 1% edge that I was looking for. And so I feel like I have a funny kind of perspective on that, just being someone who've used a lot of the products, which is fun. But that's on the sports side. We're seeing a lot of opportunities. I would say in sports with kind of like sports viewership and what is, the next generation, Gen Z wanna or how they want to consume sports. So we're super interested in that. And then on the health side, I would say we tend to stay away from, biotech, pharmaceuticals, kind of anything that requires, clinical trials. for a variety of reasons. We stay more on the side of what we like to call the non-technical side of health. So, wellness, fitness, nutrition, longevity, recovery, preventative health, femtech are kind of areas that we love to look at. I think our main focus right now is preventative health and holistic health, and kind of moving away from kind of the historical way that we've treated health conditions in more of a reactive way, and kind of being more proactive about it. And that can encompass so many different things, and so many different of those kind of pillars that I mentioned. So it doesn't have to have a sports element, but a lot of times it does, just by nature. And a good example, we have one company in our portfolio that's in the gut health and microbiome space. And from the surface, you would think, oh, they have nothing to do with sports, but one of the main categories that they treat, or I guess one of their main like customer groups is athletes, and we've been able to help them a lot on that front. So it's kind of nice to see that there are so many synergies even on the health side, where you wouldn't think that there's any tie to sports or anything like
Yeah.
that. Most of the time in our portfolio we do see those ties, which is great for us too, because that's where we can support the most in terms of our network and connections in the space. But yeah, those are kind of some of the main thesis areas that we like to look at.
For sure. And, obviously, I think for most investors, it's kind of a baseline of criteria that makes them excited when they're looking at an opportunity like the founding team, it's scalable, product market fit, et cetera, et cetera. Are there any outliers outside of that that kind of match the criteria for gets you all most excited when you're looking at any founder or startup opportunity?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we typically look at Series A. We'll look at some later stage seed companies as well. I think, for us, we're an emerging fund. We want to be able to build, a strong track record in the future. We're not investing in companies that are kind of pre-go to market, for a few reasons. Number one, I think even like a tiny bit of traction tells you so much about the company. And what we always like to say, and we have a group of interns at all times. We have different cohorts that come in. And one of the main things that, we tell them when they're speaking to startups or even researching startups is if they can find a company with, 100 incredibly loyal customers that would like die for this brand or find so much use out of whatever they're providing, that's so much more valuable than like 1,000 customers that are, half engaged, don't really care about it, things like that. So I think finding those companies that have a fan base of really kind of active customers at an early stage, no matter what stage they're at or how many customers it is. I think there's so many network effects that can come into play once you have that like really strong kind of initial loyal base. So I think that's something that is outside of the typical things that you would look for, kind of on paper. But we definitely like to see that, and like to see those kind of like diehard customers. And for me, that was when I was an athlete. I had certain performance companies that I was a diehard supporter of, that I loved, and those would be the things that we would be super excited about backing.
Yeah, and obviously, like investing, and I think from a founder perspective, like trying to get investor interested in your company is largely relationship driven. And I'm sure you get a lot of pitches, a lot of founders reaching out. How can a founder, who's listening to this, break through the noise and get your attention? Is there any tips or advice you can have, like give them on how to, get in front of you and get your interest in their product or their company?
Totally. Yeah. And in terms of like getting in front of us, we actually, and whether it's myself or my team, we look at every single inbound that we get, and we try to respond to every single one. So we try and take pride in that as much as possible, because we want to support, the sports ecosystem, the health ecosystem, and its founders, no matter if we're investing or not. Which is what we try and take to heart. But yeah, in terms of standing out, I think what's great about the sports ecosystem is that it's growing so much. There's so many tailwinds. There's so much hype around it right now. There are definitely spaces that we feel like are super saturated, and we're seeing kind of the same solution over and over, kind of maybe a slightly different take. We love founders that can have a different view on the sports market that we haven't thought of, or that we haven't seen before. Maybe it's a different perspective. Maybe they have a background that can give them like, more interesting insights about a space, or, can look at it a different way. I think that's something that we're super excited about. And, a lot of the founders that we back have, previously started companies in the space, or have, worked at a bunch of different, Fortune 500s in the space that can then be potential clients down the road. Like those types of kind of like interesting founder attributes, I think are interesting for us. And we want different takes on the space. We don't think we're experts at all. We want the founder to, tell us what's going on, tell us, how the space is going to evolve. And obviously we'll, kind of form our own opinions about it as well. But, I think it's finding those founders and companies that are looking at it at the spaces differently for sure.
Yeah, that's good. That's good insight. And getting back to the health angle for a moment, because you talked about how you invest in companies that not don't necessarily have a sports angle, or you can't really see the connection. But I think when you look at the general scope of the trends and how things are formulating in today's society, we're seeing how health and sports is converging a little bit more and impacting one another. So why do you think there is such a big convergence between those two sectors right now in this day and age?
Yeah, that's a great question and totally agree. I think we're seeing that more and more and just we'll continue to see that honestly. I think for a long time in the future. And I think one of it is awareness. I think consumers and just people in general are more aware of their own health, more aware of what affects their health, their longevity. There are a lot more biohackers out there than we had 10 years ago. So I think there's more of a focus on kind of preventative health and longevity than we had, 5, 10 years ago. So I think that's a huge tailwind in the space. And then that does tie a lot of the times into performance. I think, we've seen how fitness and just athletics in general, boost someone's health and, how important it is to be active, athletic, different types of working out can affect your, health in different ways. And so I think people are becoming more and more aware of, what they can do to extend their life and then also just, have better years and healthier years. So I think the convergence of sports kind of performance and athletic performance and fitness with, that tying into longevity and preventative health and people being just more aware of their health. And, we have so many solutions out there that are telling us so much about our health. I'm a Whoop wearer. Like I know every data point every single day and I'm, super into stuff like that. So I think there are definitely more people out there that are just becoming more aware of that. And then I think on the flip side, care and the care economy is changing so much in health. So I think they are shifting more from kind of reactive care to try and hopefully there we've seen it in a few areas, but we've seen, more health organizations and kind of like groups try and shift to a more kind of like proactive, preventative model. Obviously, insurance is a big factor that comes into this, but we are seeing somewhat of a shift as well.
Yeah, no, that's another really good piece of insight. When you think about athletes getting into the venture space, obviously we're seeing a new wave of athletes wanting to invest, whether that is from a venture partner perspective or angel invest. What advice would you give an athlete who's looking to get into this space?
Oh my gosh, I think athletes just bring such and definitely biased here, but I think athletes bring such a great perspective to the venture space. I think advice would be partner with some startups in this space that are super excited to have, an athlete on board for obviously a variety of reasons. Start to understand business models, start to understand how these startups operate. Athletes' networks are so vast, and that's obviously somewhere where they can seriously support. And obviously, we've seen case studies of like the, mega popular athletes be able to, promote the companies and have, insane ROI on different kind of investments that they've made. But I think, the day-to-day athlete, myself, I wasn't, one of the crazy top tennis players in the world. I think, we can bring a different perspective to the space. We can bring, obviously our network to the space, but athletes in general just dive into it. I think there's no better advice than dive in, start to work closely with some of these companies so you can understand, how the space operates and just the venture landscape operates. And these startups, especially in the sports space, are so eager to have athletes on board, whether it's as an advisor or even, someone that can, they can just rely on, even if it's not in like a formal agreement. And then you get integrated into the space pretty quickly, honestly. So I think just getting kind of reps of, seeing these startups and working with these startups is going to be their best friend.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Last couple questions before we wrap up. If you could wave a magic wand and solve any pain point or problem within the sports business world or athlete health, what problem would that be?
Wow, that's such a great question. Um, I would say within sports, I think from like an athlete's perspective, not even going into business, but from an athlete's perspective, I think scheduling is such a tough issue, and I'm sure you had this when you were playing too. For tennis, at least, we have such scheduling issues. Our season is so long, and I think for most other sports, schedule could be optimized for athletes like longevity and health. And I think we're seeing more and more injuries in tennis. I'm sure in other sports as well. Like I think that's a huge pain point for us. So I hope we can get the scheduling down. I sit on the board of our national tennis governing body, so I'm working to hopefully make some changes there. Um, and so I think, scheduling is a pain point. And then in health, I touched on this already, but really seeing that shift to, preventative health and hopefully figuring out ways that, insurance can still be a profitable business, even if, hospitals are, kind of shifting their model to help patients more. So I guess that was on the health side, but sports definitely schedule management.
I love that. I love that. 5 years from now, when you look at Carton Capital, what do you want it to look like? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, love to see, another fund under our belt for sure. Maybe operating out of a third one. That'd be great. And, for us, we really prioritize like our relationships with our startups. We don't have a massive portfolio for, our AUM that we have. We really want like to work closely with these startups. We don't lead investor rounds, but we want to operate, in support as much as a lead investor would. So kind of partnering with, really awesome people, trying to support their vision and their mission, is kind of the best thing that I can hope for. And hopefully, we hit some awesome ones along the way for sure.
Thank you, CiCi. This has been great. Lastly, can you let everybody know where they can learn more about Carton Capital, you, and everything you all are doing?
Yeah, for sure. So cartancapital.com is our website. Can, learn more about us, pitch us if you're a startup. You can hop onto our form message there. Also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. Just CiCi Bellis. And then yeah, we've got our whole team on LinkedIn as well. So yeah,
Thank you, CiCi. Appreciate your time.
awesome. Yeah, of course.